Welcome to our panel discussion for 2020 Kids. My name is Whitney Tucker, and I am Policy Director at NC Child. I'm going to introduce our speakers in just a minute, but before I do, I have some quick housekeeping and instructions for everyone. This will be a little repetitive if you were in our plenary, but if you weren't, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of all the capabilities today. So first, this session is completely bilingual in English and Spanish. We have a live interpreter on the line today, and everyone will need to choose either the Spanish or English channel to hear the audio. If you do not choose an audio channel, you will not be able to hear the presenters. So to choose a channel, look for the little image of a globe and the word interpretation on the bottom right side of your Zoom screen. Click on that globe icon and choose either Spanish or English. If you choose the Spanish channel, you will hear the interpreter speaking in Spanish. You'll also be able to hear the English language presenters at a low volume in the background. Now, if you don't want to hear the English in the background, just click the globe icon again and choose mute original audio. Presenters, this is for you. Please be sure to speak slowly and clearly and take some breaks while you're talking. That will make our interpreter's job much easier. And this is for everyone. We have a lot of participants in this webinar, so we will keep everyone on mute to preserve audio quality. To ask the presenters a question at any time during the presentation, type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You can use the chat box for general comments or just to communicate with the moderator. When the presentation is over, we may have time for more question and answer. I'm hoping to make that happen today, and also just some discussion. So we'll do our best to summarize key themes and ask as many of your questions as possible. Because there are just so many people here today, we may not be able to get to all the questions. And finally, this session is being recorded. So the video will be available over the next week or two in both English and Spanish. We'll send you an email when all of the recorded sessions are available. All right, now let's get started. So I'm going to introduce our speakers first. Rebecca Trammell is a community advocate and co-founder of Ruthie Trammell's Champions for Compassion. Shayla Arias is North Carolina Campaign Associate for Mamas Con Poder. Al Higgins is a city council member and mayor pro tem of Salisbury, North Carolina. And Daphne Alcial is the director of strategic initiatives at the Rockingham County Partnership for Children. I think I want to get us started with just, a little icebreaker for you guys on the panel. Could you just introduce yourself and the work you're doing to promote racial justice in your community? Shayla, let's start with you.
Thank you, Whitney. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very, very excited to be here and to get right to the questions so we don't waste time and get all these questions out. I am basically bringing the voices of Latinos to the tables where we're having all those conversations and opportunities. I'm making sure that our Latinos families and parents are at the table where decisions are being made and they have the opportunities.
Great, thank you. Rebecca, how about you next?
Hi, bienvenidos todos. I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm so excited about this topic. It's my favorite thing to talk about, even though it's probably a heavy topic for a lot of people. So what have I been up to? In 2018, I heard about a sad situation and involving our school system, and so I jumped in head first, and I was like, this can't happen. We have to begin to address equity and excellence in education, because any other attempt to solve discrimination and disparities is just undermined by not addressing education. So I started a group called Community Conversations, and we are going to talk about it. Lately, I've been super busy as an advocate for, in this season, addressing Black Lives Matter. I'm very involved in protecting the protesters, people who are protesting in Wilmington right now, and kind of being a liaison to make sure that we get our political asks heard. So that's what I've been up to.
That's a lot. Al, what about you?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Al Higgins. I'm very glad to be here and to be with all of you. Estoy muy alegre verte de mis amigos que hablan español. But I have always been a community organizer and very involved in my community. I have, and so has my husband and my family. We have deep roots here in Rowan County and in Salisbury. And I think one of the tragic issues that really brought a lot of this work to the forefront was that back in 2016, we had the death of a young Black male as a result of a no-knock warrant entry. And so there was just tremendous organizing around that. And, you know, a call for local government to really be a better partner with Black and brown people here in our community. And so that's what led to me running for city council and becoming the first Black woman ever elected to our council, serving as mayor my first 2 years, and now serving as mayor pro tem. But, you know, it's not about the title, right? It's about the work that needs to get done. And so we'll have a chance to, you'll have a chance to hear a little more about that as we go further into the panel discussion. So just thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Looking forward to hearing that. And Daphne, finally, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Daphne Alcial with the Rockingham County Partnership for Children. And we've been doing a lot of work over the past few years to really try to center racial equity in our work, both internally and externally. So we recognize that racial equity is an outcome and a process. So I pulled together community stakeholders and leaders to have conversations about racial equity, about our early childhood data, and how we can try to address that and build community resilience by taking an approach that really works to center racial equity. So I say we don't always get it right, but we have a lot of community partners who really work with us and call us in and support the work to make sure that we're being held accountable. So it's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you.
We are honored to have you. I want to jump right into the questions so that we can hopefully have some time for Q&A from our attendees as well. I'm going to direct this first one to you, Al, since you mentioned a particular incident already, but I just want to know if there was an event or a catalyst for all of you, but Al, you going first, that just caused you to shift your focus to racial justice and really demonstrated the need to lead with equity.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, and I did talk a little bit about the no-knock warrant entry and what that resulted in here in Salisbury, North Carolina. And several years before, there had been another shooting of a young Black male by a police officer. And so we just felt like it was time to begin to address some of the partnering that was happening between our police department and with our community, and also to address some of the community violence that was taking place here. So it was, I helped to organize a Stop the Violence summit that we held here in Salisbury, North Carolina. You'll find that I am not necessarily an either or kind of a person, but I really try to work from a place of both and. There's a lot of work that needs to come together, but there's a lot of acknowledging and recognizing that we also have to engage in and awareness building that we have to do. So that was why it was important for me to begin to really use my voice in a way that I felt like it really helped to begin to shape some policy and some procedures here in Salisbury, North Carolina. And that's why I ran for city council. Local government plays a significant role in shaping the overall community environment in which our families live. As such, we have to implement local laws, policies, procedures, and strategies that mitigate violence and trauma on every level. We must use a racial equity lens with intentionality to address institutional and community violence and disparate outcomes across systems interface. So for me, using a racial equity lens is foundational for me as a public servant responsible for public policy.
That's powerful. Rebecca, you had an incident as well that you alluded to. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what spurred you to action?
Sure. If the slide is available, I'd like you to, there we go. Okay, so this is Princess T. And Princess T was in the first grade, and her it was at the holiday party, and the parents were there, kids were there, they were playing games, having fun. And then the teacher said, I have presents for everyone. So the teacher began to give out presents. She called each child one by one to the front of the room to receive their gift. They were so excited. These gifts were handmade. They had their names on them. The names kept being called, and Princess T's name was never called. Princess T is the only Black child in the class. She is an isolated minority in a very a more affluent school. And unfortunately, in New Hanover County, our schools are segregated. And not only are they segregated, they are unequal. We have 6 schools in our county that are predominantly Black, and all 6 are failing. But this child went to a predominantly white school. And in her isolated experience, she was forgotten. And that is caused by a phenomenon we know as invisibility that particularly impacts Black girls. So it really is not an anomaly that she was forgotten. However, I could not let that story end like that. So when the mother, my friend, went out to Facebook, and she went to the parking lot, she was so upset. You know, I have to say this, the little girl was kind of bouncing in her seat. She was so excited. She's like, I bet my name's just being called last, and her name was never called. So she went to the front of the classroom, and she went to the teacher, and she said, Mrs. Such and Such, do you have a gift for me? And she was like, oh, I must have forgotten. I'll bring yours tomorrow. Well, the mom collected her child and cleaned up her desk and walked out. She went to the parking lot, went to Facebook, and said, when your child is the only one who does not receive a Christmas present from her teacher, hashtag only Black kid in the class. Well, that took off. People were so angry. I knew something had to happen with that energy. So I asked the community, if you have time, please go to Walmart and get a little gift for Princess T and bring it to the office and leave it in the office for her. And by noon that day, there were so many gifts that the principal had to call the parent to tell her to make sure she picked her up from school. And we packed her van and we gave her a tiara because that's who she is. She is a princess, and she is not forgotten. She is remembered. And not only will she not be forgotten, neither will the other Black children in our county, because that lit a fire in Rebecca Trammell. And I was like, we're going to talk about this. And so it wasn't enough just to make sure that the story had a happy ending for her. I wanted to make sure that the other children in our county have a happy ending, and so did the parents. And so we started a group called Community Conversations. And when the Board of Education had initially kind of like, they wanted to get to the bottom of the situation, but after the community came together, they just wanted it to go away. I was like, no, this isn't going anywhere. And so the parents wanted to speak to the board, and the board wouldn't entertain a meeting with them. And after that, we decided that we were going to go speak in public comments. They called the mom, and they decided, they told the mom, we can't have you coming to public comments. Well, they didn't tell me that, nor did they tell Dr. Cook. And so we spoke for them, and we haven't stopped speaking. And we've been pushing equity and excellence in education ever since. And we're not going to stop until the disparities stop.
That is beautiful, being the change you want to see, right? That's what we're all trying to do. So I want to push this forward, but I want to direct this next question, I think, to Daphne. What's the biggest challenge that you've encountered in your efforts to advance racial equity in your community? So maybe give us a little bit of background, about what you guys have been up to, and then, the challenges that you've faced. And Shayla, I'm gonna push this one to you too, so start thinking on it.
Yeah, so a little bit of history, I guess. In 2016, the Partnership for Children partnered with a few other organizations and started to host community trainings on racial equity. And shortly after, our school administration decided to start training our school staff as well in an effort to address disproportionate discipline data that had just come out. Once the community got word of what was happening, there was a lot of pushback from our community. And so a certain segment of the community was very vocal. They went to school board meetings and were definitely letting the whole community know that this was not a part of what they deemed to be acceptable. And so in 2018, after the election happened and new school board members were elected, our school board decided to vote against the racial equity training that was happening within our school system. And in, I think it was early 2019, in January, all of that was ended. And money that had been given from a local funder to fund that project was returned to our foundation. And so there was even conversation around, there was fear of indoctrinating our students with the work that was being led. And so our biggest challenge, as you can imagine, has been navigating and overcoming that community pushback. There's a saying that I think has become even more relevant and amplified during recent events that says, just because something doesn't happen to you personally doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And so pushing back against that has been where we have spent a lot of time and energy, really pulling community stakeholders together, pulling together people who are also anti-racist and working to become more anti-racist, and having conversations about inequity and how we can join together to kind of push back on that conversation as a whole. Feel like we're stronger when we're together. And so working together as a community to push back on that voice that had become dominant, even though we know there's a lot of people who don't agree with that. So really trying to amplify those voices that push back on that. And we have a racial equity learning community that consists of probably, I guess now it's probably up to 30 or 40 people, community members and leaders across our community. And we work together with each other just to have conversations and to deepen our understanding of racial equity and what it looks like in Rockingham County, and how we can really start to push that dominant narrative back against what we know is true and happening in our community, and to amplify voices of those who are most impacted by inequity.
Interesting. So it sounds like you guys have a pretty large block, pushing up against this, and you're still moving forward. That's great to hear.
We're trying.
Shayla, what about you? What do you think is the biggest challenge that you've encountered in your efforts with Mamas Con Poder or otherwise?
I think I do want to say that I could relate to many of this, because as a woman of color, we do have that unique story. So I've never even realized how deep it was, with starting with my parents, and then the experience, the unique experience that I have. But I think that especially this after elections, because of what certain leaders have said about my race and continue to say, and the misconception, the stereotype and misconception that we have, it has definitely been breaking those barriers and try to open opportunities. It has been definitely very, very hard within our community, with our systems, especially applying for systems in our community, dealing with community leaders who believe that Hispanic education is very low and they shouldn't have certain positions, nor should they have a voice in our community. So definitely those breaking those assumptions, and I personally have dealt with this. One of the biggest one was the uneducated part. I would never forget that I was sitting in an IEP room. This is way before I started doing a lot of this work. And I was pregnant with my son, and I was in an IEP room with my child. And I remember a white woman psychologist look at me when I was trying to tell them, this is not going to work for my child, right? And they looked at me and said, "What is your degree?" And I said, "I don't have a degree, but I am the mother of this child, and I know this will not work for her." And they said, "Well, ma'am, you have to have some kind of degree to kind of, have an opinion about this. And as being pregnant, dealing with all these emotions, all I remember is that I broke down and cried, right? I accepted I diagnosed for my child that it shouldn't been because I was put under pressure. And so that was one of the ways that I realized that we have a voice, you know, and we are put under pressure because we are constantly stereotyped that we're not educated, that we don't have a voice. Leaders in this country continue to push us down. So breaking those barriers and trying to educate people about their rights and try to make them understand, yes, you have rights. It's one of the biggest, the assumptions that they have about Hispanics in my community continue to get stronger, and it's negative every single day. So just trying to break those barriers, break that communication and those assumptions.
Wow. So it sounds like there's just so much that can get in the way of doing this work and doing it well, that it can be really overwhelming for people. So I'm wondering, this is just to anyone on the panel, what would you say to audience members who are listening in now who want to get started in addressing racial equity in some way in their community, but they don't know where to start?
I'll go ahead and jump in with that one. And I tell people this all the time: you matter. You matter. Your voice matters. The jurisdiction that you live in is just as much your home as it is anybody else's home. Where you live belongs to everybody. And so you have to use your voice, use your presence, occupy your space fully to say, we all are here and we all should have a voice in shaping what our city, what our environment looks like. And I got to go back to something that Dr. Jones-Taylor said today, that she said so much powerful stuff. I'm telling you, what a great opening keynote. Oh my gosh, I could listen to her all day. But she said something really key about putting people in place that look like you. Don't be afraid to step out and run for office. I never in a million years ever thought that I would be a public servant, an elected public servant. But I tell you what, it's an important role to fill, because those perspectives need to be in the room as much as we can get those perspectives in the room. Yes, we need white voices also, but we need Black and brown people to begin to run for office, and we need Black and brown and white allies to get behind those people and get them in office, because it does begin to change and shift the policies that we're seeing, the local laws that we're seeing, the state laws that we're seeing. So I'm saying, jump in and look, I'm here, call me, I'll help.
I want to piggyback on that. I think it's absolutely right. But I also, we need to keep in mind that people whose native language is not English have more barriers than those that don't. And so having that barrier as a language, it's huge, right? It is completely huge. So I took a lot of strategy. Even though I spoke the language, I was born in Mexico, and I could relate with a lot of the individuals, you know, sharing my story. It's always important for you to recognize your space and who you're working with, recognize the people that you're working with, their needs, and get connected with those that already have a foundation established within their communities, because it's all about trust at the end of the day. I feel that so many negative things continue to happen, right? So when more people come to you, you feel not only overwhelmed, but you want to have that connection and that trust. And for me, I could definitely say that I continue to build that trust. And once you build that trust and that foundation, it gets you anywhere. So definitely, you know, you're not alone. There's many leaders out there, many people working on the same things, same passion as you. So just try to connect to those that already know the community, they already have that trust, so they can slowly introduce you, and you don't feel like you have to start all over doing the work by yourself.
You know, I think that some of the questions that are coming in the chat box are really relevant to this, you know, idea of, you know, where do I start? What do I need to do? We have a question. Someone's asking, I'd like to know the best way for me to be an activist as a white woman without stepping in front of my peers or others I'm fighting with that are people of color. Thoughts on that, guys?
I always say you need to stand beside them, not behind them, and not in front of them. That is like one of my biggest things. It's like I'm working with someone else rather than I'm working for them, you know, or I'm doing the work for them. So I think it's really, really important, again, to develop that friendship and relationship, but always keep in mind that what you might, for example, you guys might be working on Medicaid, right? But we have to understand how the family dynamic is and why Medicaid is important and how we can work with that family to get there. So I'm always trying to learn from the family and always understand and work towards together rather than saying, hey, this is what's going to work for you. This is what should, because we all different and we all unique families. So my work for me might not work for someone else. And I think that a good leader would always recognize the qualities of whoever they're working, no matter what, and work towards those qualities rather than those hard things that they need to work to.
I think you touched on something. The key thing is listen. I find that a lot of my advocacy comes from being able to listen and identify the problem. And the difference is, like, a leader not only listens enough to hear listens enough to hear the problem and to identify the pain, but leaders also find the solution. And so, like, for example, I am kind of excited in a sense that I see an opportunity for our Black and brown children right now when it pertains to education, because schools aren't opening, which means they have to make sure that there's equal access to a sound and basic education, which means kids who are not on the grid now have to be on the grid. They have to have a device. They have to have internet. Guys, this is a game changer. When you're sitting there writing a paper on your mother's phone at midnight because you don't have a laptop, that means that you're going to make grammatical errors that you probably wouldn't have made if you had spell check and a laptop. Well, now these kids are going to get some laptops, and these kids are going to have internet, because AT&T has a great program. For $50, the school system can get a hotspot. And then for $5 to $10, I think, a month, that means they can have internet access in their home. This is a time to push. And so listen to where people's pain points are. I remember one time, in my learning, I went to coffee with Dorian Cromarty, and his grandmother was Rachel Freeman. And there's an elementary school that's named in her honor, and he volunteers there. It's a Title I school, and it has an F rating right now. And I'm not a crier, but he began to tell me about the situation, about how these kids live. He told me that there are kids who write papers on their mom's phone. He told me that there are kids who don't have toilet paper, girls who skip school once a month because they don't have hygiene products. He told me about children who don't have beds to sleep in, and that's the norm. It's not, I thought that kids didn't have beds to sleep in after the hurricane because, their stuff got destroyed. No, they don't have them on a good day. If you give them food because they're hungry, make sure they don't have to have electricity because they might not have power. I'm like, this is America. This is really? And so I saw all the hurdles and the obstacles, and I realized the problem is poverty. And the achievement gap comes down to the economic gap, the tech gap. And when I saw that, I began to push for equal access to internet. And I called them out at the Board of Education, called AT&T, was like, hey, can't you do something about this? Time Warner Spectrum, can't you do something about this? And when they didn't fix it fast enough, I went to City Hall, and I'm like, can you tell me why we don't have internet for all of our kids? Put them on blast. Talk about it. Keep talking. That's what I have to say.
Put them on blast. Love that.
Talk, don't hide. Don't be afraid to use your voice, and I said that constantly because I'm the living example of someone who was confused and took a lot of negative diagnosis for a child that it shouldn't happen, right? But now that I know all this, it's amazing. That is absolutely true. I go into meetings and I have had people ask me, so what's your degree in? So how do you know this stuff? I don't have a degree. My degree is called Living Life and Learning for those hard experiences, because sadly, color women go through so many other experiences that white women don't, and if I keep talking about it, more people are going to step up and share their experiences. So don't keep it quiet. Like I tell my kids, I'm loud now. And now that I feel that I know and the impact that my voice can do, I don't keep it quiet anymore. And Might not be a good thing, but I'm not afraid.
And I want to build on what my fellow panelists are saying here. It's so important, you know, for whites who are joining this work and being accomplices or allies or however you label yourself. It's so important to listen. So important to listen and to walk beside us. I love that, to walk beside us. And when you're learning, because really truly we just don't know what we don't know. We really don't know what we don't know in many instances. Don't be afraid to ask a question, but you cannot lean on your Black and brown partners that you're working with to teach you all your lessons, because that can become exhausting for us. It becomes exhausting and it just wears us down. There's so many resources out there. We have the Racial Equity Institute here in North Carolina. Dina Hayes and that group, they do fabulous, tremendous work. Please do engage in some of their groundwater training and some of the other trainings that they offer. And the other thing I'd like to say for Black and brown people who are working with our white allies, that, you know, again, we don't know what we don't know, and that sometimes we may get a little impatient, but to please be patient, because people are learning and moving and growing. And rather than calling those allies out, let's call those allies in and say, you know, we love you, we appreciate you. But here's an area that you can improve in because you stepped on my toe and it was an ouch.
Y'all, we are getting some incredible feedback from our attendees today and lots of really great questions. And we do have some more time in the session, so I want to get to more of those. Just a reminder for attendees, if you have a question for the presenters, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we're going to try and get to as many of these as we can. Just skipping around here in the question and answer box, we have a question: how do you advise we empower families to join the conversations on racial equity work when they're stuck in survival mode?
You get to know your people, meet people where they are, you know. Don't introduce something without understanding what their situation is and what they need at that moment. You know what I mean? Most of our families nowadays, right now, it's all they want is to, you know, have food on their table. So if food it's what you're going to connect with, then do it that way. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask. I think we all in survival mode, you know, in our Spanish, and I can only speak for the Spanish families that I continue to talk with. It's basically getting to know what they need and how we can do it. You know, we find ways for them to join conversations, even if they don't have Zoom, they can join it on a phone, you know, or things like that. So just meeting people where they are, they love to learn. If you give them the opportunity, they love to learn, but meet them with an interpreter. Don't use bar translations. You know, that's why I constantly said it's very important to know who you're working with, because you will lose conversations like that. And it might sound petty and silly, but having their own space in their own language not only allows them to be valued, but it also brings respect, and it opens a different door where they're just like, okay, you're taking time for me, I'm going to tell you. And who parent doesn't want to learn? I mean, if you really love your kid, don't you just want to be a better parent for your kid? We'll find anything to survive. So I just say getting to know the people that you work, ask them what their needs are. You know, every family's needs are different. Our assumptions, it's not an option.
That's a great one.
I
can
can
go on the Oh, I'm so sorry. I just want to ditto on the interpreter. I speak Spanish, but I still take an interpreter with me because I'm not Latina. And so there may be certain aspects of culture that I just don't understand, and I don't want to miss that. I want to bring as much shared power in the room as possible.
Daphne, were you going to build on it?
Yeah, I would say going off of that, I mean, we just know that if we want an intervention or if we want a project or if we want anything that works, then our parents have to be, or the community that we're serving has to be engaged and excited about that. We know that the parents are the experts of their children, and so who best to consult when we're trying to develop something than the experts? And we do it in every other field, so why not do that when we're working with the community? And I think too, like Shayla was saying, you know, we have to be inclusive. So if that means changing our meeting times or offering snacks or providing childcare when we're meeting in person, or, you know, sending toys for the children to play with when you're doing something virtually, or something like that. And finally, compensating individuals for their time. I mean, we cannot expect for us to be there in a professional setting, getting paid to be there in our professional role, and not do the same for the families and the people that we're asking to lend their voice. And so I think that's a huge part of it. There, are opportunities to figure out ways to make it work, even if budgets are tight. It's a critical part of making sure that you're providing equitable processes.
That is so important. And it really gets right at the heart of another question that we had that, I really wanted to direct to you too, Daphne, just because of your experience with community pushback too. So someone said that working in a rural community in Western NC, their program is seeing a lot of pushback in regards to addressing racial inequity and holding cultural competency trainings in their community and school system. And they were wondering about effective tools and strategies that folks on this panel have used to help increase engagement and community buy-in for these programs and discussions. And so I think that you touched on that a good bit there, Daphne, but I'm wondering if you have any more thoughts on this or if anybody else wants to chime in on that.
I'll say that this is probably a personal struggle that I deal with, and I go back and forth between, how much time do we spend educating our decision makers versus educating our community to vote in different decision makers. And so I think there's a lot of tension there that we go with, and a lot of it is really pushing up a groundswell of community activists who have to demand something different and demand something better. And a lot of that goes back to how do we raise up leaders who are ready and willing to run for office. Just like Al said earlier, I mean, we need people who have lived experiences to be in those decision-making roles, and really providing that space for that.
Any other
space? I just want to talk on that because of the keynote speaker. She was amazing, and I think the way she said it was perfect, and I really hope that a lot of people don't took it negative, but when she said that let others step up, right? And I think that often happens a lot, that I continue to look that in a lot of conversations or a lot of organizations or whatever, you might have a grant that says, well, you have to have a Hispanic person, you have to have a Black person, and you are just a check in their setting. And things like that. So that's an opportunity.
Well, Shayla, we're having some connection issues with you. I don't know if that's just for me or is everybody feeling that?
Just talk about allowing people and really realizing for you to step back, and don't be afraid to give others the opportunity. It doesn't matter whether they have a degree or not. It doesn't matter what it is. As long as you have the passion within you. I mean, personal stories are powerful. I'm here because of my personal story. So just allowing people and step back without a fear, be beside them to guide them. Don't be selfish to yourself thinking because you're white, you can change everything. Don't take other people's idea. Just work beside them and allow other people to show their passion to
Can I jump in? Because I know hers is kind of hard.
Ingredients we have for a cake, the more.
Shayla, we're having some connection issues with your line, and it keeps cutting in and out. I think you were really onto something there.
Sorry, I was just sharing my cake technique. Just basically saying, if you have more ingredients, that cake is going to be good. So just allow more people to come in and bring their ingredients to the cake, and don't be afraid. You might be making the new discovery of a cake, Just don't be afraid.
Love that. And Rebecca, you were going to build on that?
Yeah, well, it's something I really felt like I needed to say about, when people are in survival mode, like how do you get people to engage? I think that, one of the things that we have to do is bring in our allies, because Black people are tired. We have seen the death of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, we've lost John Lewis. It's a nonstop funeral procession. And it's a nonstop fight, it's a nonstop struggle, and people really don't listen to us very well. And so, and it's the truth. And I really appreciate my white allies. I have a friend on my team, his name is Joe Finley. And when I know that they're not listening to me, I say, Joe, can you talk to them? And I love one thing that he says about the statues, for instance, that have recently come down in Wilmington, North Carolina. He said, white people put them up there and white people need to take them down. White people built this system and white people need to change it. That's another thing that my friend Patrick Bryan says. He said, this was created by people and people can change it. And the people who are benefiting from it are the ones who really need to shoulder the work. So don't always expect, and especially one of the things that was really detrimental to me as a person of color fighting in this work of anti-racism is that I began to see how it became to be expected of me, that all of this work, all this time, it was expected for free. And I'm like, well, here I am again, enslaved to justice, you know? And I decided to stop that, you know, and I'm still learning. So I just wanted to say, allies, step up, we need you, and they listen to you better. And until they do, please continue to stand up and speak up with us.
Thank you for that. We have so many questions and only 3 minutes left. So I'm just gonna pick, a few that I think could be pretty quick. One is, are virtual focus groups effective ways to get community information? Yes. We're all agreed on it?
Yes.
Love to see it. And then also a question here, can you talk more about the data analysis that you've engaged in to identify and address racial inequity? How do you know when there's a problem? How can you tell?
Well, we have Cape Fear Collective here, and they're working on data, and that's very helpful. I do think that data, the numbers don't lie. And when you see that a Black child is 7.6 times more likely than a white child to be referred to juvenile hall or the juvenile system, when you see that Black children are 8.3 times more likely to be sent to short-term suspension, or that in our school there are 4 schools and the majority in all 4 schools, the average age, the average grade for a high school student is a D across the board, but much higher if they are white, you begin to see things aren't quite the same. So follow the numbers don't lie.
I agree with that. And there are lots of ways you can get your data locally and also statewide. Yeah, those numbers do not lie.
There's a racial equity report card. Check it out.
Great. And then let's see, what about advice for state agencies, since they often don't have connections to the communities that local agencies do? What do you think that, potential advocates who work within state agencies should be really focused on right now?
Well, I'm going to encourage those state agencies to find ambassadors for those communities that they're trying to serve. I don't think we should put the excuse out there, well, we're not as connected to that community, we're trying to look for the whole state. No, find somebody in those communities so you can get that information. Make those conversations happen and make that information exchange happen.
That's fantastic. And then in our last minute, I want to ask this question. How do you continue to show up in exhausting spaces, advocate for change, challenge systemic structures, all while maintaining self-care and that, fire for the work? Do you guys have, parting recommendations for everybody to keep their heads up in this?
Therapy and friends.
Those are good ones.
My family, and I like to sew.
I would agree with the family part. My husband definitely helps to keep me on track, so it's important. And my kids, who you may have seen.
I'll say my kids. My oldest, it's my rock. She's the reason why I'm doing the things that I do, and I've always looked at her being 11-year-old and has never complained about everything. So if she can do it, I can do it. And she always making sure that she brings hope. And so she's like, just do it, mommy. Just do it. You'll see. You'll be happy at the end. So definitely my kids.
Love that. Thank you all for being here. And thank you everyone who's listening in for attending this session. I hope that you'll all join us at 12:30 for our networking lunch. Goodbye everyone and have a great day.